My name is Susan, and I want to tell you about the day I discovered that my children had stolen $38,000 from me to fund a luxury vacation in Dubai. But more importantly, I want to tell you about what happened when they came home from that vacation and found out that their house keys no longer worked. To understand that moment, you need to understand how I became the kind of mother whose own children felt comfortable stealing from her credit card to pay for international luxury travel. It didn't happen overnight. It was a gradual process that took years to develop and only minutes to finally end. It started the way these stories always do, with love, good intentions, and the belief that helping your children meant solving their problems for them. My son Michael is 28 years old. My daughter Jessica is 25. Both of them are college graduates with degrees that should have prepared them for successful careers and independent lives. Instead, both of them have spent their adult years treating my house like a free hotel and my bank account like their personal emergency fund. After my divorce 6 years ago, I thought having the kids move back home temporarily would be good for all of us. They were struggling with student loans and entry-level job disappointments, and I was adjusting to living alone for the first time in decades. It seemed like a mutually beneficial arrangement that would help them get established financially while giving me companionship during a difficult transition period. That temporary arrangement became permanent when both of them decided that living rent-free with all expenses covered was preferable to the challenges of true independence. Michael has had 7 different jobs in the past 5 years. Each time he quits or gets fired, he explains that the workplace was toxic, or the management was incompetent, or the compensation was insulting. He's always planning to start his own business or go back to school or move to a different city where opportunities are better, but somehow these plans never materialize into actual action. Jessica graduated with a degree in marketing, but claims she can't find entry-level positions that match her expectations for salary and work-life balance. She's been freelancing for the past 3 years, which seems to involve sporadic social media consulting that brings in maybe $300 a month on a good month. During the years they've been living with me, I've covered their housing, utilities, groceries, car insurance, cell phone bills, and countless emergencies that always seem to require immediate financial intervention. When Michael's car needed repairs, I paid for them. When Jessica wanted to take a professional development course, I covered the tuition. When either of them had medical expenses or legal problems or credit card bills they couldn't handle, I stepped in with solutions. I told myself I was being a supportive mother, helping my children during a difficult economic period when young adults faced unprecedented challenges in achieving financial independence. I told myself that my assistance was temporary, that they were working toward self-sufficiency, and that my sacrifices were investments in their future success. I was lying to myself about all of it. The truth was that Michael and Jessica had learned to use my love for them as leverage to avoid taking responsibility for their own lives. They had figured out exactly which combinations of gratitude, guilt, and emotional manipulation would convince me to solve whatever problems they'd created through poor planning or irresponsible decisions. More importantly, they had trained me to believe that being a good mother meant making their lives comfortable, rather than helping them develop the skills and character necessary to make their own lives successful. The first major warning sign came about 2 years ago, during what should have been a routine conversation about household expectations. I was working 50 hours a week as an office manager to support our household of 3 adults, and I was beginning to feel overwhelmed by the combination of full-time employment and full-time caretaking for 2 people who contributed nothing to our shared living expenses. "I think it's time we talked about everyone contributing to household costs," I said during one of our family dinners. "I'm happy to continue providing housing, but I think it would be fair for you both to help with groceries, utilities, and other shared expenses." The reaction was immediate and hostile. "Mom," Michael said, his voice taking on the patronizing tone he used whenever he thought I was being unreasonable, "you know we're both dealing with financial challenges right now. It's not like we're choosing to live here because it's convenient. We're trying to get established in a really difficult economy." "I understand that," I replied, "but you've both been living here rent-free for 3 years. Even a small contribution would help with the expenses and show that you're working toward independence." Jessica jumped in with her own version of the same argument. "Mom, if we could afford to pay rent, we'd be living in our own places. The whole point of staying here is that we're trying to save money so we can eventually move out. If you start charging us rent, you're just making it harder for us to become independent." The logic was circular and self-serving, but it was delivered with such conviction that I found myself doubting my own reasonable request. Maybe they were right that asking them to contribute would somehow delay their path to independence. Maybe I was being short-sighted about the long-term benefits of my continued support. "I'm not talking about full market rent," I said. Just a few $100s a month to help with the increased costs of having 3 people in the house instead of one. A few $100s might not seem like much to you, Michael replied. But when you're trying to build savings and pay off student loans and cover your basic personal expenses, every dollar matters. Every dollar mattered to Michael when it was his dollar, but apparently my dollars were infinite and expendable. What about contributing in other ways? I suggested. Maybe taking over some of the household maintenance or cooking meals or helping with yard work. Jessica rolled her eyes. Mom, we both help around the house already. And we're both working and dealing with our own stress and responsibilities. We can't be expected to take over all the domestic duties just because we're living here temporarily. Temporarily. After 3 years, Jessica was still describing their living situation as temporary. That conversation ended with me backing down from my request for financial contributions and accepting vague promises about increased help with household chores that never materialized into consistent action. But it planted a seed of awareness that would grow over the following months as I began to pay closer attention to how Michael and Jessica actually spent their time and money. If they couldn't afford to contribute to household expenses, how were they able to afford regular restaurant meals, new clothes, entertainment, and various gadgets and accessories that seemed to appear regularly despite their supposed financial limitations? If they were focused on building savings for eventual independence, why did they never seem to have any savings to show for their years of rent-free living? If they were working as hard as they claimed to establish their careers, why did they always seem to have time for social activities, travel to visit friends, and other pursuits that didn't contribute to their professional development? The more I observed their actual behavior versus their stated financial limitations, the more I began to understand that I was being systematically manipulated by people who had learned to exploit my parental instincts for their own benefit. The second major warning sign came last year during the holidays when I discovered the extent of their actual spending habits. I was cleaning Jessica's room while she was out, something I'd been doing for years, along with her laundry and most other domestic tasks, when I found credit card statements that had been left on her desk. I wasn't intentionally snooping, but the numbers on the statements were shocking enough that I couldn't help but notice them. Jessica, who claimed she couldn't afford to contribute $50 a month to our grocery budget, had been spending $400 to $600 monthly on clothes, cosmetics, restaurant meals, and entertainment. When I looked more closely at the transactions, I realized that many of the charges were for luxury items and experiences that were completely inconsistent with her claims about financial struggle. Designer handbags, expensive salon treatments, premium streaming services, high-end restaurants, the spending pattern of someone with significant disposable income rather than someone barely scraping by. That evening, I decided to have a direct conversation with Jessica about what I'd discovered. Jessica, I said, I accidentally saw some of your credit card statements today, and I'm confused about something. Her reaction was immediate defensiveness. You were going through my private financial information. I wasn't going through anything intentionally. The statements were sitting on your desk while I was tidying your room. That's still a violation of my privacy, Mom. My financial situation is none of your business. Your financial situation becomes my business when you're living in my house and claiming you can't afford to contribute to expenses, while apparently spending hundreds of dollars every month on luxury items. Jessica's face cycled through several emotions before settling on a combination of anger and righteous indignation. First of all, those aren't luxury items. Those are basic personal care and professional development expenses that I need for my career and my mental health. Designer handbags and premium beauty treatments were professional development expenses. The rationalization was breathtaking. Jessica, you spent $400 last month on clothes and accessories. That's more than I spend on groceries for both of us. Mom, you don't understand what it's like to be a young woman trying to establish herself professionally. Appearance matters in my field, and I can't show up to networking events and client meetings looking like I can't afford to take care of myself. What networking events, what client meetings? You told me last month that you weren't getting enough freelance work to justify looking for your own apartment. Jessica stared at me for a moment, clearly realizing that her explanations weren't consistent with her previous claims about her financial situation. My income varies month to month, she said finally. Sometimes I have good months where I can afford to invest in my professional image, and sometimes I have bad months where I need help with basic expenses. So on the good months, you spend all your money on luxury items, and on the bad months, I cover all your basic living expenses. That's not how it works, Mom. You're oversimplifying a complex financial situation. Then explain it to me. Help me understand how you can simultaneously afford hundreds of dollars in discretionary spending while being unable to contribute to the household expenses I've been covering for 3 years. Jessica looked trapped, which was exactly how she should have felt. Look, she said finally, I don't think it's fair for you to police my spending when you're the one who offered to let me live here rent-free. If you didn't want to support me, you shouldn't have made the offer in the first place. I offered to let you live here rent-free. As if the 3-year arrangement had been my idea rather than their gradual takeover of my home and finances. Jessica, I offered to help you get established after college. I didn't offer to subsidize your lifestyle indefinitely while you spend your own money on luxuries. Subsidize my lifestyle? Mom, I'm not living some extravagant existence. I'm doing my best to build a career while dealing with an impossible economic situation for people my age. That conversation ended the same way the previous one had with Jessica, convincing me that I was being unreasonable and unsympathetic to the challenges faced by young adults in today's economy. But it also opened my eyes to the reality that both Michael and Jessica had been lying to me about their financial situations for years. They weren't struggling to achieve independence. They were choosing to prioritize their personal spending over their responsibilities because they knew I would cover the difference. They had turned me into their personal subsidy program, and they felt entitled to that arrangement continuing indefinitely. The third and final warning sign came 6 months ago when I discovered that both Michael and Jessica had been using my credit cards without permission. It started when I noticed some unfamiliar charges on my monthly statement. A restaurant I'd never been to, a gas station in a part of town I rarely visited, a few retail purchases that didn't match my shopping habits. The individual amounts were small enough that I initially assumed they were errors or fraud that I'd need to dispute with the credit card company. But as I looked more closely at the dates and locations, I realized that the charges corresponded with times and places where Michael and Jessica had been according to their social media posts and conversations with me. When I confronted them about it, both claimed that they'd been given permission to use my cards for specific emergency situations and had simply forgotten to mention the transactions to me afterward. Mom, Michael explained, you told me I could use your card if I ever had a real emergency and didn't have access to my own accounts. This was technically true. I had told both of them that my credit cards were available for genuine emergencies when their own resources weren't sufficient. But I'd been thinking about medical emergencies or car breakdowns, not casual restaurant meals and shopping trips. Michael, using my card to buy dinner at a steakhouse isn't an emergency. I was networking with a potential business contact, he replied. It was a professional dinner that could lead to job opportunities. I considered that an emergency investment in my career development. A $90 dinner at an upscale restaurant was a career development emergency. The creative justifications were getting more elaborate and less believable. Why didn't you mention the charge to me when you got home? I forgot. I've been dealing with a lot of stress lately, and it slipped my mind. Jessica had similar explanations for her unauthorized charges. Every purchase had been either an emergency or a misunderstanding or a simple oversight that she'd intended to discuss with me when the timing was better. Over the following weeks, I began monitoring my credit card statements more carefully, and I discovered that both Michael and Jessica had been using my cards regularly for months, possibly years. The pattern of charges revealed that they'd been treating my credit accounts like extensions of their own spending power, using them whenever their personal budgets couldn't cover the lifestyle choices they wanted to make. The total amount they'd charged without permission over the past year was nearly $8,000. $8,000 in unauthorized spending, on top of the housing, utilities, groceries, and other expenses I'd been covering for 3 years. I was working 50 hours a week to subsidize their lifestyle while they spent their own money on luxuries and treated my financial resources like they belonged to them. That's when I began making changes. The first step was simple. I canceled all the credit cards they'd been using and had new ones issued with different numbers. I also changed my online banking passwords and removed their access to any financial accounts where I'd previously added them for convenience. The second step was having a direct conversation with both of them about the unauthorized spending and my expectations going forward. I've discovered that you've both been using my credit cards without permission, I said during a family meeting I'd called specifically to address the issue. This has to stop immediately. Mom, Jessica said, we both thought we had permission to use those cards for emergencies. Emergency restaurant meals, emergency shopping trips, emergency entertainment expenses. None of the charges I've found qualify as emergencies by any reasonable definition. Michael jumped in with his own defense. We always intended to pay you back for any charges we made. It's not like we were trying to steal from you. When were you planning to pay me back? You've both been living here rent-free for 3 years while claiming you can't afford to contribute to household expenses. When exactly would you have the extra money to reimburse me for your unauthorized spending? Neither of them had an answer for that question. Going forward, I continued, you will not use my credit cards, debit cards, or any other financial accounts for any reason without explicit prior permission. If you have a genuine emergency, you'll ask me directly and we'll discuss it before any charges are made. That seems a little extreme, Mom, Michael said. What if there's a real emergency and we can't reach you immediately? Then you'll have to handle the emergency using your own resources, the way independent adults do. Our own resources? Jessica's voice rose with indignation. Mom, you know we don't have the kind of savings that would cover a real emergency. Then maybe it's time to start building those savings instead of spending all your money on luxuries while expecting me to cover your basic living expenses. That conversation established clear boundaries about credit card usage, but it didn't address the underlying issue of their complete financial dependence on me. I was still covering all their basic living expenses while they spent their own income on discretionary purchases, and they clearly had no intention of changing that arrangement voluntarily. That's when I began researching my legal options for removing adult children from my home. What I discovered was both encouraging and alarming. Encouraging because I did have legal rights to require them to leave my property even if they'd been living there for years. Alarming because the process could be complex and contentious, especially if they decided to resist. But before I could take any legal action, Michael and Jessica handed me the perfect justification for ending our living arrangement once and for all. 3 weeks ago, I woke up on a Tuesday morning to find a note on my kitchen table informing me that they had decided to take a much-needed vacation and would be gone for 2 weeks. The note was casual and presumptuous, written as if they were informing me about plans I should be happy to support rather than asking for permission to leave their responsibilities behind. Mom, the note read, we've decided to take a trip to Dubai with some friends who invited us at the last minute. We know it seems spontaneous, but we both really need a break from job stress and we might not get another opportunity like this for years. We'll be back in 2 weeks, thanks for understanding. Love, Michael and Jessica. Dubai, a luxury vacation destination that would cost thousands of dollars for flights, hotels, meals, and activities. Michael and Jessica, who claimed they couldn't afford to contribute $50 a month to our grocery budget, had somehow found the money for a 2-week trip to one of the most expensive cities in the world. But it was what I discovered later that day that transformed my confusion into rage and my disappointment into determination. When I checked my credit card statements online, I found a series of charges that explained exactly how Michael and Jessica had found the money for their Dubai vacation. Airline tickets to Dubai, $8,400. Hotel reservations, $12,600 for 2 weeks at a luxury resort. Travel insurance and visa fees, $1,500. Shopping and dining reservations, several thousand more in prepaid experiences. Total charges to my credit cards for their unauthorized vacation, $38,472, $38,000. They had used my credit cards to fund a luxury international vacation without asking permission, without discussing the cost, and without any apparent concern for how I would feel about subsidizing their leisure travel to one of the world's most expensive destinations. For context, $38,000 was more than I earned in 8 months of full-time work. It was more than I spent on my own living expenses in an entire year. It was more money than I'd ever spent on a vacation in my entire life. And Michael and Jessica had charged it to my accounts as casually as they might have bought coffee, but the violation went beyond just the money. It was the complete disregard for my financial well-being, my consent, and my basic human dignity that revealed exactly how they saw me and our relationship. I wasn't their mother who deserved respect and consideration. I was their personal ATM machine who existed to fund whatever lifestyle choices they wanted to make. I spent that first day in a state of shock, staring at the credit card charges and trying to process the magnitude of what they'd done. $38,000 stolen from me to pay for a luxury vacation I would never be able to afford for myself. By the second day, the shock had transformed into something much more focused and purposeful. If Michael and Jessica wanted to treat me like a resource to be exploited rather than a person to be respected, then I was going to show them exactly what happened when that resource decided to stop being available. The first step was calling my credit card companies to report the charges as unauthorized and fraudulent. The customer service representatives were sympathetic and assured me that the charges would be disputed and likely reversed, but the process could take several weeks or months to complete. The second step was consulting with a lawyer about my options for removing Michael and Jessica from my home permanently. Susan, my attorney explained, since your children have been living in your home for several years without a formal lease agreement, they're considered tenants under state law. You'll need to provide proper legal notice and follow eviction procedures if they refuse to leave voluntarily. What if they're engaged in criminal activity? Is theft of $38,000 grounds for immediate removal? Potentially, yes. If you can demonstrate that they've committed crimes against you, that might provide grounds for expedited removal. but you'd need to file criminal charges against them. Filing criminal charges against my own children. 6 months earlier, the idea would have been unthinkable. Now, after years of escalating exploitation culminating in outright theft, it felt like the only appropriate response. The third step was changing every lock in my house and installing a security system that would prevent Michael and Jessica from regaining entry when they returned from their stolen vacation. The locksmith I hired was a middle-aged man named Frank who seemed to understand that this was about more than just home security. "You doing this because of family problems?" he asked as he worked on the front door locks. "My adult children have been stealing from me," I said simply. "When they come back from the vacation they funded with my credit cards, I want them to understand that their free ride is over." Frank nodded approvingly. "Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who take advantage of you the worst. Good for you for standing up for yourself." Over the next 10 days, while Michael and Jessica posted photos of themselves enjoying luxury hotels, expensive restaurants, and exotic experiences in Dubai, I systematically removed every trace of their presence from my home. I packed all their belongings into boxes and arranged for them to be stored in a rental unit that I paid for 1 month in advance. I removed their names from all utility accounts and insurance policies. I changed my emergency contacts at work and updated my beneficiary information to reflect that I no longer considered them dependable family members. Most importantly, I prepared the legal documents necessary to have them formally evicted from my property if they refused to accept that their living arrangement with me was permanently ended. By the time they returned from Dubai, I had transformed the house from a place where they lived rent-free into a place where they were no longer welcome. The confrontation happened on a Sunday evening when their flight landed at the local airport. I was sitting in my living room, reading a book and enjoying the peace and quiet I'd been experiencing for the past 2 weeks, when I heard a car pulling into my driveway. Through the window, I could see Jessica and Michael getting out of a rideshare vehicle with their luggage, both of them tan and relaxed from their stolen vacation. They were laughing about something and seemed completely confident that they would walk back into my house and resume their previous lifestyle as if nothing had changed. I watched them approach the front door and insert their keys into the lock. The keys didn't turn. I watched Jessica try her key again, then hand it to Michael to see if his would work better. I could see the confusion on their faces as they realized that something was different. Michael tried his key several times, jiggling it and pushing on the door in case it was just sticking. Nothing. Finally, Jessica knocked on the door. "Mom," she called out, "are you home? Our keys aren't working for some reason." I sat in my chair for another moment, savoring the justice of the situation, before finally getting up to answer the door. When I opened it, Michael and Jessica were standing on my front porch surrounded by their luggage, looking confused and slightly annoyed. "Mom," Michael said, "what's wrong with the locks?" "Neither of our keys is working." "That's because I changed the locks," I replied calmly. "You changed the locks, why would you do that?" "Because I discovered that you used my credit cards to steal $38,000 to pay for your vacation, and I decided that people who steal from me aren't welcome in my home anymore." The expressions on their faces shifted rapidly from confusion to understanding to panic. "Mom," Jessica said quickly, "we can explain about the vacation charges. We were planning to talk to you about it when we got back." "Talk to me about it? You charged $38,000 to my credit cards without permission and left me a note informing me that you'd decided to take a vacation. What exactly were you planning to discuss?" "We were going to work out a payment plan," Michael said. "We know it was a lot of money, but this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity and we didn't want to miss it." "A payment plan?" They were going to work out a payment plan to reimburse me for the $38,000 they'd stolen. Using what money? They'd been living with me rent-free for 3 years while claiming they couldn't afford basic living expenses. "Michael," I said, "you've been living in my house for 3 years without contributing a single dollar to household expenses. Jessica's been doing the same thing. What money were you planning to use for this payment plan?" "We're both going to get serious about finding better jobs," Jessica said. "This vacation gave us time to think about our priorities, and we've decided to really focus on our careers when we get back." They were going to get serious about finding jobs after I'd subsidized a $38,000 vacation that gave them time to think about their priorities. The audacity was breathtaking. "That's wonderful," I said. "You can focus on your careers from your own apartments using your own money after you've repaid the $38,000 you stole from me." "Our own apartments?" Michael's voice cracked slightly. "Mom, we can't afford our own apartments. You know that's why we've been staying here. You could afford a $38,000 vacation, but you can't afford apartment rent." "That's different," Jessica protested. "The vacation was a special situation." "Yes, it was special, it was theft." I could see both of them processing the reality that I wasn't going to simply accept their explanations and allow them to resume their previous living arrangement. Mom, Michael said, his tone becoming more pleading, please don't do this. We made a mistake, but we're family. You can't just kick us out over money. I'm not kicking you out over money, Michaels. I'm removing you from my home because you've spent 3 years treating me like a resource to be exploited rather than a person to be respected. And the vacation theft was the final demonstration of how little regard you have for my well-being. We do respect you, Jessica said desperately. We love you, Mom. This whole thing has just been a misunderstanding. Jessica, if you respected me, you wouldn't have spent 3 years living rent-free in my home while spending your own money on luxuries. If you loved me, you wouldn't have stolen $38,000 from my credit cards to fund a vacation you knew I could never afford for myself. We were always planning to pay you back. With what money? You've never paid me back for any of the other unauthorized charges you've made over the years. You've never contributed to household expenses despite living here for 3 years. You've never shown any genuine concern for the financial burden you've placed on me. Both of them stood in silence for a moment, apparently realizing that none of their usual justifications and manipulations were going to work this time. So what are we supposed to do? Michael asked finally. You're supposed to do what independent adults do when they need housing. You find apartments you can afford using your own money, and you build lives that don't depend on exploiting other people's generosity. But we don't have money for deposits and first month's rent, Jessica protested. Then you'll have to figure that out, the same way millions of other young adults do when they can't rely on their parents to subsidize their lifestyles indefinitely. This is insane, Mom. Michael's voice was rising now, shifting from pleading to anger. You're seriously going to make your own children homeless over a credit card dispute. I'm not making you homeless, Michael. I'm declining to continue housing you rent-free after you stole $38,000 from me. There's a significant difference. Where are we supposed to go tonight? All our stuff is in our rooms. Your belongings are in a storage unit. The address and access code are in this envelope. I handed Michael the information I'd prepared for this moment. The storage is paid for 1 month. After that, you'll need to make your own arrangements. Jessica grabbed the envelope from Michael's hands and stared at the storage unit information. You moved our stuff out. You went through our personal belongings and moved everything out of our rooms. I packed your belongings and put them in storage so you could access them when you found your own housing. I was actually trying to be helpful. Helpful, Jessica's voice was getting shrill. You've changed the locks on us and moved us out while we were gone. And you think you're being helpful. More helpful than you were when you stole $38,000 from me to pay for a luxury vacation. The circular argument continued for another 20 minutes, with Michael and Jessica alternating between pleading, threatening, guilt-tripping, and demanding that I reconsider my decision to permanently end their residency in my home. Throughout all of it, I remained calm and consistent in my position. They had violated my trust and exploited my generosity beyond any reasonable limit, and there would be no more opportunities for them to continue doing so. Mom, Jessica said finally, if you don't let us back in, we're going to have to sleep in our car tonight. I'm sorry to hear that. There are several budget motels within 10 miles of here, and you both have friends you could probably stay with temporarily. Budget motels cost money we don't have. Then maybe you should have considered that before you spent $38,000 of my money on a vacation. We can't undo the vacation, Mom. Punishing us now isn't going to get your money back. You're right, Jessica. The money is probably gone forever. But removing you from my home will prevent you from stealing more money in the future, and it will send a clear message about the consequences of treating family members like personal ATM machines. That's when Michael played what he apparently thought was his trump card. Fine, Mom. If this is how you want to treat your own children, then don't expect us to be here for you when you get old and need help. Don't expect us to take care of you or visit you or include you in our lives. The threat was meant to terrify me into reconsidering my position. The idea that I would lose my children forever if I didn't continue enabling their exploitation was supposed to make me back down and invite them back into my home. Instead, I felt a profound sense of relief. Michael, I said quietly, if your presence in my life is conditional on my willingness to be stolen from and exploited, then I don't actually want you in my life. You don't mean that, Jessica said, her voice shaking. I absolutely mean it. For 3 years, you've both treated me like someone whose only value was financial. You've shown me no respect, no genuine affection, and no consideration for my well-being. If losing access to my money means losing access to my children, then I'm discovering that my children weren't really there to begin with. Both of them stared at me as if I'd spoken a foreign language. But we're family, Michael said weakly. Family members don't steal from each other, Michael. Family members don't lie about financial emergencies to justify unauthorized credit card charges. Family members don't take $38,000 vacations using money that belongs to their parents. Everyone makes mistakes, Mom, Jessica tried one more time. This wasn't a mistake, Jessica. This was a deliberate choice to prioritize your own desires over my financial security and well-being. This was the culmination of 3 years of deliberate choices to exploit my love for you rather than earn my respect. I could see that neither of them had any remaining arguments or strategies for changing my mind. They were finally beginning to understand that this conversation was not a negotiation, but a notification of decisions I'd already made. "So that's it?" Michael asked. "You're really going to cut us out of your life over money?" "I'm not cutting you out of my life over money, Michael. I'm protecting myself from people who have demonstrated that they see me as a source of funding rather than as a human being deserving of love and respect. What if we promise to pay you back? What if we sign a contract or something? What if you get jobs and apartments and learn to live independently like the adults you claim to be? What if you develop the character and integrity that would make a relationship with you something I would actually want rather than something I have to endure?" "You're asking us to completely change who we are," Jessica said. "I'm suggesting that who you are right now is not someone I'm willing to continue enabling or supporting." The conversation finally ended when I told them that I was going inside and that they needed to make their own arrangements for the evening. If they remained on my property, I would call the police and have them removed for trespassing. They left, taking their luggage with them, and I watched them drive away in another rideshare vehicle, presumably heading to a motel or a friend's house, or wherever people go when they can no longer exploit their parents' generosity. I went back inside my house, my quiet, peaceful house where no one was demanding money or making messes or treating me like an unpaid servant, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. I felt free. Over the next several weeks, I began to understand exactly how much of my life had been consumed by Michael and Jessica's constant needs, demands, and crises. For the first time in 3 years, I could come home from work without worrying about what problems would be waiting for me. I could make plans for my weekends without having to account for their schedules or their expectations of my availability. I could spend my money on things I wanted rather than things they needed. Most importantly, I could exist as a person with my own interests and priorities rather than as a resource whose primary function was solving other people's problems. The credit card fraud investigation took 2 months to resolve, but eventually, most of the charges for their Dubai vacation were reversed. The credit card companies agreed that $38,000 in unauthorized international travel charges constituted clear fraud, and they restored the money to my accounts. But even if they hadn't, even if I'd been forced to pay for Michael and Jessica's luxury vacation permanently, removing them from my home would still have been the right decision, because the issue was never really about the money. The issue was about being treated with basic human dignity by the people who claimed to love me. During those first few months after they left, Michael and Jessica made several attempts to reconcile on their terms. They would call or text with apologies that were actually justifications, explanations that were actually blame-shifting, and requests for temporary help that were actually attempts to reestablish the exploitative relationship I'd ended. "Mom," Jessica said during one phone call, "I've been doing a lot of thinking about what happened, and I realize we made some poor choices, but cutting us out of your life completely seems like an extreme overreaction." "Jessica, I haven't cut you out of my life. I've simply declined to continue being your unpaid landlord and unauthorized funding source. But we're struggling, Mom. Without your support, we're barely getting by." "Good," I said. "Struggling to get by is what motivates people to develop the skills and character necessary to become self-sufficient. You want us to struggle. I want you to learn that actions have consequences and that other people's generosity should never be taken for granted. What if we really change this time? What if we get jobs and start paying our own way? Then you'll be living the kind of life that might make a relationship with you something I'd be interested in." "Does that mean we could move back home?" "Jessica, you're 25 years old. Home for you needs to be a place you create and pay for yourself, not a place where you live rent-free while exploiting someone else's resources." Those conversations became less frequent over time, as Michael and Jessica apparently realized that I was not going to return to the old arrangement, no matter how much they pleaded or promised to change. But I did hear updates about their lives through mutual friends and extended family members. Within 3 months of being forced to become independent, both of them had found full-time jobs. Not perfect jobs, not dream jobs, but steady employment that provided enough income to cover basic living expenses when they shared an apartment and lived within their means. Within 6 months, they had both developed budgeting skills, time management skills, and other adult life competencies that they'd never needed to learn while I was handling all their responsibilities. Within a year, Jessica had been promoted to a position with significantly better pay and benefits. Michael had started a small side business that was generating supplemental income. In other words, they'd both proven that they were perfectly capable of taking care of themselves when they no longer had the option of exploiting someone else to avoid responsibility. 2 years later, I received a letter from Jessica that I think about often. "Dear Mom," it began, "I know it's been a long time since we talked, and I know you probably don't want to hear from me. But I wanted you to know that I finally understand what you were trying to teach me when you changed the locks and made me leave home. For the first time in my adult life, I'm actually proud of myself. I have a job I like, an apartment I pay for myself, and savings in the bank that I earned through my own hard work. I have friends who respect me because I contribute to our relationships rather than just taking from them. I know I treated you terribly for years, and I know the Dubai vacation was the last straw that made you realize you had to protect yourself from my selfishness. I don't expect you to forgive me, and I don't expect you to want a relationship with me. But I wanted you to know that forcing me to become independent was the best gift you ever gave me, even though it didn't feel like a gift at the time. I was angry at you for years, but now I'm grateful. You saved me from becoming the kind of person who never learns to take care of herself. If you're ever willing to talk to me, I would love the chance to show you who I've become when I'm not depending on someone else to solve my problems. Love, Jessica. P.S. I've been paying into a savings account for the past year to reimburse you for all the money I took from you over the years, including my share of the Dubai vacation. I know money can't undo the disrespect I showed you, but I want to make things right financially even if I can't repair our relationship." I sat in my kitchen reading that letter 3 times before I finally picked up the phone and called her. The conversation we had that day was different from any conversation we'd had in years. Jessica didn't ask me for anything. She didn't make excuses or blame other people for her problems. She talked about her job, her apartment, her goals for the future, and her genuine regret for the years she'd spent treating me like a resource rather than a person. "Mom," she said toward the end of our call, "I know I don't have the right to ask this, but do you think there's any chance we could rebuild some kind of relationship? Not the old relationship where I was dependent on you, but a new relationship between two adults who respect each other." "I'd like that, Jessica," I said honestly. "I'd like that very much." We started slowly, with occasional phone calls and eventually coffee meetings where we talked about our lives without any expectation that I would solve her problems or that she would be entitled to my financial support. Michael took longer to reach the same understanding, but eventually he too realized that our relationship could only be rebuilt on a foundation of mutual respect rather than financial dependency. Today, 3 years after I changed those locks and refused to let them back into my house, I have relationships with both my children that are healthier and more genuine than anything we had during the years when they were exploiting my generosity. They're both independent adults with their own homes, their own careers, and their own sense of pride in what they've accomplished. When we spend time together, it's because we enjoy each other's company, not because they need something from me or I feel obligated to help them avoid the consequences of poor decisions. Most importantly, they both learned the lesson I was trying to teach them when I smiled and changed those locks. That love isn't something you take advantage of, it's something you earn and nurture through treating people with respect and consideration. The $38,000 they charged to my credit cards for that Dubai vacation ended up being the best investment I ever made in their futures, even though I never intended to make it. Because it forced all of us to confront the reality that our relationship had become exploitative rather than loving. And it gave me the motivation I needed to finally establish boundaries that protected my well-being, while giving them the opportunity to develop into people worth having relationships with. My name is Susan, and when my children used my credit cards to steal $38,000 for a luxury vacation, I changed the locks on my house because I finally understood that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's worst impulses. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give your children is the opportunity to discover that they're stronger and more capable than they ever believed while they were depending on you to solve their problems. And sometimes the wisest thing you can do is smile when someone takes advantage of your kindness, because it gives you the clarity you need to protect yourself and the motivation they need to become better people. If Susan's story resonated with you, you're in the right place. Here at Wisdom Strikes Back, we share stories of seniors who refuse to be underestimated and prove that experience is power. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell if you believe that wisdom and dignity deserve respect. Share this video with someone who needs to remember their own strength. Tell us in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated because of your age? How did you handle it? Your stories inspire our community. Thank you for watching, and remember, you are never too old to stand up for yourself. Until next time, keep proving that wisdom strikes back.